because we're talking about meetings today, 2 questions for you to pop into the chat box. You don't have to answer both, just whichever one grabs you. First one being, do you have a great meeting tip to share with the gang, with the community? And or do you have a meeting pet peeve? What's your #1 meeting pet peeve and or great tip? Please pop it into the chat box.
So great tips and pet peeves. Great pet peeves and tips.
No camera. Now, I'm assuming, Lori, you're referencing for virtual meetings. So this could be virtual or in person. So
virtual or in person. We're talking about both.
Yeah.
But yeah, as a speaker, that's one of the things that drives me bonkers.
Absolutely.
It's so difficult. I did 2 events last week. One group, they were both about 150 people. One group, literally 0 cameras on.
Yeah.
And the other group, 6.
Yeah.
So,
I did a meeting a few weeks ago, and they were told to do this ahead of time, and that was to change their profile picture to their high school graduation picture.
Nice.
And everybody did that. It was really quite funny. And then they got to go back to their regular self later. And most people agree they look better today than they did when they were 18.
Perfect. All right, we got a ton of tips. This is
so many. We're not going to be able to.
There we go. This is the program. We're just going to read them.
I know. Where do you think we get our material, folks?
This is
no original thoughts here.
Being late.
Yeah. All right.
Hey,
so
let's go ahead and introduce ourselves while some of these great ideas are coming in. So, hey, you with the cool blue background.
Okay, you like that?
Yeah.
And then if you want the extreme close-up. Oh, that didn't work. All right. Okay, so here we go. It is 2 minutes past the hour. So I say, let's officially bring the meeting to a commencement. Can we get the minutes from the last meeting, Richard?
Yes. 45.
That is correct. 45 minutes. That is exactly how long every other Wednesday is. Minutes are covered. Oh, let's move on. So we've titled this session, we have to stop meeting like this. And we're going to obviously be discussing meetings. And we're going to talk about this from we're going to kind of split it up into 3 different sections. The first section, we're going to do a little bit of stats stuff. It's stuff we all kind of already know, but maybe with a little bit of a different spin. Then we're going to talk about rudimentary, stuff you should be doing. But then the bulk of this particular program, we're going to be talking more about what is this relevant? How is this relevant to culture? How do we fit it into the theme of every other Wednesday? Yeah. And so I actually dug up a few stats. I'm not going to give you the reference for the stats, only because I want to play little silly games and guessing around them. And then I'll give you the reference for them afterwards. So this is just a website I found. And specifically it's talking about the meeting trends of 2020. So there's
Sanjay, real quick, should we introduce ourselves?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Sure, why not? Go ahead. Who are you?
Oh, I'm Richard Haddon, and I'm speaking to you from my home in Jacksonville, Florida, and my empathy and care for humans is too great to tell you what the weather's like here today.
Sure.
That's very kind of you. My name is Michael Kerr. I'm from beautiful Canmore, Alberta in the inspiring Canadian Rockies, and I'm excited to announce that my latest book, The Jerk-Free Workplace, is now available on Amazon or through our office. You can contact me too for a signed copy, but it's available on Amazon now, so please check it out. I hope you'll check it out. I'm very excited about this book. You'll want to get one for all of your friends, your pets, your family. And
if you want to read it twice, you should get 2 copies.
That's right. If you want to read it 5 times, 5 copies.
Shameless plug. Shameless plug. Not with us today because as restrictions are easing up in different parts of the world, Jeff Tobe, based out of Pittsburgh, is actually
he's in a meeting. He's in a meeting.
Yes, he's in a meeting. He's stuck in it. Can't get out. My name is Sanjay. I am from Toronto, Ontario. And by the way, you're saying how nice your weather is. For the Canadians, we're hovering around 15 degrees here, and to speak American, that's like 60, 65 degrees. So
yeah, cool.
It's quite nice and sunny here.
Great.
So with that said, I actually wanted to very quickly jump in. Like I said, I have a few stats here. This was apparently according to Harvard Business School, and this is based on 2020. And the reason why I'm saying it's based on 2020 is because, we had this little pandemic thing going on. So in the chat box, give me a sense, okay? According to this, it was observed that the number of meetings attended by workers on average, did it rise or fall in 2020, and by how much? Did it rise or fall in 2020, and by how much? rise a lot, rise by 20%, rise by 30%, rise by 25, rise by 50. Okay, so rise by 33. According to this survey, it did rise, but it only rose by 13.5%. Next one, which is the research found, was there an increase or decrease in the average length of meetings? Is there an increase or a decrease in the average length of meeting? And by how much? Any guesses on how much? I'm seeing increases, decreases. It looks like there's more decreases than increases.
Decrease by 30%, 15%, by 30 minutes, by 15 minutes, 50%, 20. It's all over the map. It's crazy out there.
And you know what? I would assume that has a lot to do with the organizational culture. Again, according to this particular research, it was found that it decreased by 20.1%. Now,
Yeah, I would think so.
me being a numbers nerd, I actually did the math and I said, okay, wait a minute. If we have 13.5% more meetings and they were reduced by 20% in terms of time, overall, did we spend more time or less time in meetings according to that data? This wasn't provided. I actually had to go calculate it. And according to that data, the actual answer is it decreased by about 10%. So we're only spending about 90% of the time we were spending prior to 2020 in meetings. It said, again, a few other stats here. It says the average count went from 5.9 to 6.9 in terms of meetings, and 36% of meetings were only 30 minutes, and 20% were an hour. The other interesting thing here too, was in terms of size of meetings, saying 44% of the group meetings in 2020 were limited to 4 to 7 people, while 24% had fewer participants ranging from 4 to 5. Okay, so just to give you an idea, overall, it looks like there's not a dramatic increase or decrease in terms of time, but it looks like we're doing more meetings, but smaller chunks. Okay, time spent in meetings. Before I make you guess, it says 11 million meetings are held each day. That means 55 million meetings are held per week, or 220 million per year.
I think I went to most of those.
There you go. Yeah. What percentage of an organization's time is spent in meetings? According, again, to this survey from 2020, what percentage? 34, too much. Too much, yeah,
too much is what I would say.
All right, and again, lots of according to the survey, the number was actually 15%, and it says it's increased every year since 2008. Okay, a few more, and then we'll move on from this, but obviously, you can probably guess, the higher up in management level you go, the more time spent in meetings. According to this, middle managers spent 35% of their time in meetings. Upper management spent 50%. 50% of their time in meetings.
I'm surprised it isn't higher, actually,
Well,
they're just not telling the truth.
Which is why I wanted to go to this stat too, which is, they said a recent survey found that blank percent of employees complained that spending too much time in meetings hinders them from being actually productive at work.
100.
No, it's not that high. What percentage complained that too many meetings hindered their ability to work?
When I was a senior manager in the government, I used to have so many meetings, I didn't have time to go to my other meetings.
Well, and the number here again, people are actually pretty close, 67%. So they're saying 2/3 of people feel that meetings actually hinder them from actually getting their work done. People say 35% of people say they waste, not they spend, they waste 2 to 5 hours per day in meetings and calls, and they have nothing to show for it. And again, I can give you some stats too around, we spend $8 bazillion a second in wasted meetings. I'm going to spew a few of these things on unproductive meetings. They said that a survey of 6,500 people in the US, UK, and Germany found that among the 19 million meetings observed, ineffective meetings cost $399 billion in the US, 58 billion in the UK. Wow. So based on that, they said that if you have a company with 100 employees where people are making $60,000 a year on average, meetings cost is $2.25 billion, and unproductive meeting costs of $750,000. So in a $6 million company, you're looking at $750,000 in waste. So the punchline of what I was trying to get at here with this is, and it's not something that, that's new or that we don't know. The punchline is we spend a lot of time in meetings, right? Not always that productive, and often can be extremely wasteful. Agree, disagree, gentlemen?
Yep.
Absolutely. I want to hit on a comment.
So what are some great answers that we're getting from our people in the audience?
Yes, go ahead.
Not going to be able to get to them all, but I think it's Frederick points out that I wonder if the decrease represents the move away from the high-performing organization model that was popular in the 1990s. That may be a factor for sure. Elizabeth makes the comment of what percentage of people are more tired after a day of virtual meetings compared to in-person meetings. There was just a really fascinating in-depth article in Harvard Business Review last week that talked about Zoom fatigue, Zoom stress, and how it really is a real thing. And contrary to people putting in as a pet peeve that their cameras should be on, there are several experts recommending that you don't hold that policy firm because it is tiring people out to have their camera on. And so we should actually be more flexible.
Can I jump in on that?
Sometimes allow people the opportunity to turn off their cameras.
So this whole idea of Zoom fatigue, I don't know if it's necessarily, they're labeling it Zoom fatigue, but I don't think it's actually Zoom that's fatiguing them. I think that for some reason, the accountability has completely changed in the virtual world, because now people are like, oh, it's you have to break down every minute. It's like between 12:57 and 12:59, what were you doing? And you're like, I was using the restroom. But now we're held up at a higher, more accountable standard. Whereas before, on your way to the meeting, you might bump into someone at the water cooler and update them as to what happened at the hockey game last night. And that was kind of built in. And now we have the structure that makes people more accountable. That, I think, is what's stressing them out more so than being in front of a camera.
Well, that's part of it, but I view that as a side issue, Sanjay, a separate issue. They are saying there's lots of research that there's just way more mental processing that goes on here, right? I mean, look at us even. We're trying to look at each other, maintain eye contact, look at the chat box, thinking about the lighting, thinking about,
It's not more mental processing, it's different mental processing.
Different,
because when you're in the room, we're just more used to it. And when we're naturally with someone, if they smell bad, we shift over. So we're still doing all that stuff, but now it's just because this language is new to us, it's overwhelming. And and that can burn us out.
Yeah. Great. What else you got, Mike?
In the chat box?
Yeah. I want to hear tips and pet peeves.
Oh, that's way back. We'll circle back to that. But Judy's pointing out the eye strain too from virtual meetings is a concern. There's lots of ergonomic stuff around this too. So much harder to concentrate on a black screen than on a human when you don't have the cameras on. I suppose that's an issue. So lots of fodder for this. But why don't we talk now about
So then moving into the next section here, which is this idea of, okay, so we know we overmeet. We know we have a lot of ineffectiveness. So, and again, we also know a lot of the tips and stuff, but let's just very superficially, let's jump on some of those. We want to go around in a circle. We want to read it from the chat box, but to me, one of the most important things is this idea of be specific and have a purpose and an outcome. Don't have a meeting for the sake of having a meeting. I remember around the turn of the century, I was part of a .com company, an organization. And I know no organization in the world has ever done this, but sometimes, hypothetically, organizations, they make a meeting for a single person decision, or they'll take a single person decision when it should have been a meeting. So I remember we sat down for 3 hours and discussed our website. Should our website be our first name at the company name, or our first initial and last name at the company name, or just our last name at the company name? We spent 3 hours doing this. And so, yes, obviously, if we aren't clear on the objective or what the purpose of it, we're going to definitely be overmeted.
Yeah, I think the starting point is always, and it goes back to that old saying, this meeting could have been an email, right? Do you need to have a meeting? Could this have been an email? Could this have been a conversation? One of my favorite sayings that I tell clients and audiences all the time is, I think we need to have more conversations at work and less meetings.
So let's talk
real conversations. And so one of the things I recommend is taking a hard look at your meeting schedule and going on a meeting diet. Yeah. I know one thing that many companies do very successfully is they have certain days where they stick to a hard rule of no meetings. So they create meetingless days. Thou shalt not have any meetings on Tuesdays or Thursdays or whatever it is. And
meetingless Tuesdays,
so much more productive. So looking at just the number of meetings, but then also, like you said, Sanjay, being clear on your focus, but also being clear on being efficient with time, right? Meetings love a vacuum. You will fill the space. If you book 2 hours for your meeting, you're going to stretch it out to 2 hours.
Sure.
Netflix, even with serious issues, Netflix has a pretty strict rule that no meetings go longer than 30 minutes. Amazon, Jeff Bezos has this two pizza meeting rule where you shouldn't have more people than one can feed 2 pizzas, and they too stick to some sort of time limit. Flickr, the tech company, I love this idea. They have everybody drink a 16-ounce amount of water, bottle of water before the meeting, and then the meeting is over as soon as the first person says, I gotta go to the washroom, I have to pee so badly, the meeting's done.
That's awesome.
Oh, well, people would love me, yeah, because I'd be the guy who breaks up the meeting every time. I know another a company that I've spoken for their leadership meeting many times over the years, and they have this it's not really a hard and fast rule, but it's a practice that has developed, and that is, so you go on Outlook or Teams or whatever, and you see, and you say, oh, somebody's got this period of time free, I can put them in on a meeting. But their rule is don't be the 4th meeting. And so it's kind of a loose rule that if somebody's already got 3 meetings that day, you don't get to be the 4th, right? Because even though they may have that time free, 3 meetings is enough in a day, and by the time they get to that 4th meeting, they're going to be toast. So I like that idea. Just limit it to the number of, and if you have to have your meeting the next day, the business will go on.
The old cliche that I've always liked was, no agenda, no attenda. Right?
Yeah.
So don't waste my time. If you don't know why we're having this meeting, I don't want to be there. So, the more crystal clear we can be. The other thing that I find though too is if you're hosting the meeting and you don't want to be hosting the meeting,
it shows.
People can smell it. Yeah. I mean, over the years when I've worked with speakers on presentation training, this is one of the classic things I love is when people say, especially when they're nervous about speaking, they get in front of a group and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't really have any time to prepare. This isn't going to be very good. I've always said to them, you don't have to tell me. That's going to become really obvious.
Right.
Right. And it's kind of the same thing with the meeting. There's a headspace that goes with it. If you are excited and you own the meeting and you're like, that this is relevant information. And by sharing this with my colleague, we're going to be able to service our customers better. We're going to be able to create a better environment, a better culture, and actually having that in the back of your head, although people may not be able to pinpoint it, they can smell it if you were like dragging your feet and you'd rather eat your own spleen than be in the meeting. So, I mean, this maybe it's ooga booga for me to say it, but having this intentional thought of actually wanting to be there, people can sniff it out.
Yeah.
So Sanjay, that's an excellent point. By the way, Wayne points out, it's Parkinson's law when it comes to that concept of meetings filling the time set that you have allotted, right? But Sanjay, back to that point. That again means we need to be intentional about whether we actually need this meeting, be crystal clear on who needs to be in that meeting, and we set up expectations through everything, through a really well-written agenda that is smart, that is giving people the information they need beforehand so they're really clear on goals, on expectations, and also just setting intentions for everyone at the start of the meeting. I chaired a couple of contentious meetings when I was president of the Canadian Association of CAPS last year. And one of the things I did, or 2 years ago, was I started those meetings by being really clear about what the intentions were and setting the intentions in terms of everyone's participation and best interest and what we were looking for in terms of outcome, to just kind of ground the discussion. And I think that's so important.
I also think though, it's not only up front, but at the end. So this idea of, throughout the meeting, taking the notes, especially if people that don't need to be there, but need to sort of be high level briefed on it, take the notes, but also what are the actionable items and what are the takeaways? So you're having the meeting. So what are the next steps? What's the fall through? Now what, so what? And I think that up front, but also again, that layered piece, and then also creating accountability. Somehow the saying, okay, we had the meeting. It's not one and done. What's the next step?
Well, and one way that that's often done, it works pretty well, and it's simple, and that is just to go into the meeting with a what, who, and when mindset. That at the end we're going to know what's going to happen, who's going to be responsible for it, who's going to take ownership for it, and when is it going to happen. And if you can answer that for most everything in the question, in the meeting, then you're going to have, I think, a pretty productive meeting. The question that also comes to mind for me, and I'd love to hear what our audience has to say, and that is there some criteria to know, should this be a meeting, or should this be one of those other things that you mentioned earlier? So I'd love to hear from people. How do you make the determination, yeah, we should have a meeting about this, or we should accomplish this objective in some other way? So if anybody has any ideas on that, let's hear them.
Lori has a question here too. Are we also calling when the management needs to connect with their virtual staff meetings? So many of these are also connecting for conversation. How do we plan those out?
Yeah. That's a good question. If it's a one-on-one or if it's a group setting. To me, if it's a group setting, I would always call it a meeting. If it's just a conversation between two people, that's a great point. It may just be connecting.
The other thing, though, too, is to me, a meeting, there's an element, a very large, strong element of two-way communication. Because if it's just one-way communication, me making an announcement and it's one way me viewing at you.
Yeah, that's an announcement.
Send me a voicemail, send me a video. That'll do it. But to have a proper meeting, you're going to have an agenda. You have a specific item to discuss. We're going to go back and forth. We may not even necessarily agree, but I want to hear the dialogue that comes from it before we can move forward to make whatever the decision or whatever that next step is.
Yeah, and to me, the benefit of having a meeting is to share input and perspective of at least two people, and perhaps more than that. So to your point, Sanjay, yeah, if it's just an announcement, we can do that. In fact, I know of a CEO who has realized this, and he's not having as many meetings, and he does sometimes he'll get his phone and record something and send it out to everyone. In lieu of a meeting, here's a message.
Yeah, and I think that sort of that meeting versus the connection piece, I think, and I think it's a great question. I'm just kind of mentally digesting it. And I think to me, the difference is one has more specific business goals. You have a meeting to further the objective of the business. You have a connection to further the objective of the culture.
Or of the relationship.
The relationship, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stephen, I like what Stephen wrote here. Meetings is when we need action outcomes. So we're focused on creating some sort of outcome. Conversation is when we share information to build towards something. It reminds me, and there's all sorts of different forms and different styles of meetings we can have, right? Beryl Health call centers, they do something called chat and choose, where they're very informal and the managers are there and the staff just, they're obviously they serve food and refreshments, but there's no agenda. The employees lead the meeting through questions and bringing up topics that they want to bring up. So it's very much guided by the employees. So it's a meeting, but it's also kind of just as a feel of a conversation, of a group conversation, a mini town hall, if you will.
Yeah. So how do we relate meetings to culture in an organization? Yeah. What do you think?
Well, for me, this is huge. I think meetings help shape our culture and they should reflect the culture that we want. I think meetings are a critical touch point. So when you do meet, get your meetings right. They matter a lot. So if you want to be known as a creative, fun, inspiring workplace, then your meetings sure as heck better be creative, fun, and inspiring. Your meetings have to reflect that. And because they're a key touch point where people get together, I think people should, in an ideal workplace, be excited to go to meetings. Where else do we have this opportunity to share our passion with each other and exchange ideas and find out what people are working on and get all excited about stuff? That's the mindset we want to hopefully generate when we're having a meeting.
Yeah, and I think, again, as you said, Michael, the meeting reflects or projects perhaps the culture, and it works the other way around as well. And so when I think about how do we use culture to the advantage of individual employees? A lot of it has to do with, especially new employees, how do you learn the culture? Because the faster you can come up to speed on your organizational culture, theoretically, the more influence you can have, the more successful that you'll be. So now think about this. We have people who are new to organizations. We've always had that, but now we have people who are new to organizations and they've never met anyone because they've only been working from home or working virtually. And so I know one particular organization, it's a nonprofit, and it has its roots in U.S. military culture. And as you might expect, their meetings, and I've sat in on some of them, their meetings are very kind of structured and regimented and so forth. And then just as you were saying, Michael, in more, organizations that have a different culture that's maybe more spontaneous, more creative, that's acceptable for the meeting. So if we can help people learn pretty quickly what works around here, not that they shouldn't buck that or challenge that maybe, or even try to improve that, but I think it does a disservice to allow people to just kind of land in the middle of a meeting and kind of not understand how things work. Maybe we're going to change them, but for how they work right now.
Right. I think that it's the brand of the organization. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
And what happens is if people try to do too many brands, they're not true to anything, and it confuses people. So if, for example, using what you're saying, Richard, if you're really regimented as an organization, but you try to have these fun, go, yippee skippy kind of meetings. Yeah. There's a disconnect.
Yeah, and maybe that's fine, but you might want to apply that to other parts of the organization too, if you're trying to effect a culture change.
Remember, we're not just talking though about structure in meetings or talking about all those subtle little clues, the communication styles, whether it's a structured, regimented meeting or not. We learn things about our culture through how the leaders communicate. If I'm the boss and I'm rude to people and I shut people down when they throw out a counter idea to me, that's
the culture.
Pretty powerful message about your culture, right? So we have to be really aware of how we're communicating, how we're listening, how we're advancing ideas in meetings, how we're building trust, how we're building relationships. That all shapes our culture. It's really, really important.
It's all microcosm, macrocosm stuff. Like if you take someone who is an aggressive jerk, okay, chances are
a character in your book, perhaps, Mike.
Exactly. Yes, there you go. And now tell us about that book. If you take someone who's an aggressive jerk, chances are they're an aggressive jerk the way they drive. They're an aggressive jerk the way they close the door. They're an aggressive jerk the way they ask someone out on a date. They're an aggressive jerk. But the point, what I'm getting at is who you are will ooze in every form in which you present it. And so if you are trying to create an intentional culture, you should be looking to facilitate that and to express that in every possible form. Exactly what you're saying. If the boss shuts everyone down, you can't, smile for the camera and be all happy-go-lucky, sing kumbaya, and then go and start treating your employees like dirt, because it will eventually, the house of cards will crumble. So the more intentional we can be, the more specific we can be, and the more true we can be to the brand of the internal culture in which we're trying to create, the more sustainable and the more buy-in you're going to get from everyone.
Yeah, some of these issues that are coming up in the chat box too, and what we've circled around and going back earlier, again, go back as well, and I want to hit this point before I forget it, to really setting your intentions and being clear on the purpose of the meeting. A huge amount of stress for people attending meetings happens when people come with cross purposes. So I think we're going to make a decision on X at the end of this meeting, but I'm the only one who has that expectation because actually, no, this meeting was going to be a freewheeling brainstorming kind of meeting. We're just going to come up with lots of great ideas, but there's no expectation a decision is going to be made today. So you frustrate those people who want to move fast, who want to make a decision, and conversely, right, the opposite happens too. So we have to be really, really clear again about what purpose does this meeting serve, and thinking about different meetings for different purposes.
And I would also think that if there's a certain level of stress going on in the organization, we ought to be clear that this meeting is not about whatever people might be afraid of, if we can do that.
Yeah, well, totally agree. Okay, so let's move on to the chat box then. And let's go to some of those things that they were talking about up top in terms of some of the pet peeves and things that work. And let's tie those into the issue of culture.
Yeah.
So
you want to go back up to the top?
all the way. Yeah. Did people talk too much? Jeez. Scroll.
A lot. People arriving late.
My goodness.
People arriving late is a common pet peeve. A couple of things I suggest for that is put in a pre-social time before your official start with a meeting, so people know that, hey, you can arrive 10 minutes early to have those casual conversations, the social connections, but also award a door prize for early attendees and a fun penalty for whoever is the last person to arrive to the meeting, if you want a fun solution to this, right? So they have to sing a medley of Celine Dion songs in front of everyone if they're the last person, or they have to take the meeting minutes, because nobody likes taking meeting minutes.
45.
Right. So, by the way, just around that, I was working with an organization and they did something similar, but the punishment was they had to MC the next event, the next meeting.
Okay, yeah.
And which, on one hand, you go, oh, I don't want to do that, but the thing that sucks is you get people emceeing your meeting that don't want to do it, and that will suck the life and the energy out of any event you're trying to do. So if you're going to punish them, make sure that it's something that's not going to hurt the organization as a whole.
Right.
Right. So, and actually, I believe it was if they were caught with their cell phone on in a meeting or their phone rang, whatever, that was the punishment. They had to MC the next meeting.
Yeah. Well, and I've had clients who do it's like literally $10 into the social fund committee, into the party fund committee, or you bring donuts next time, right? So you're right, Sanjay. It doesn't harm the company, but it's just it's a fun penalty for them. Similar industries, they actually, with some of their meetings, if you are late, including the CEO, by the way, because we lead by example, if you're late for the meeting, too bad, the door's closed, you're missing the meeting. And that includes the CEO. So if he didn't get there at 11 o'clock, they're starting the meeting without the CEO.
Right.
And they're continuing to have the entire meeting without the CEO,
Yeah.
Well,
What else you got?
Exactly. Well, we talked about cameras being off or on, that debate with the virtual meetings, not having an agenda. And we know that's like meetings 101, right? You have to have a good, strong agenda. One recommendation that I've seen work very effectively is writing your agendas as questions for people rather than as topic things, posing them as questions to get people just thinking ahead of time. But can I, on this agenda note, can I share a story? Because to me, this really speaks about the power of doing meetings right. When the CEO, Alan Mulally, you guys familiar with Alan Mulally? He's won all sorts of accolades. One of the top CEOs in the world. He was recognized.
What was he famously CEO of?
Ford. So we took over Ford Motor Company when they were really struggling, and the way he turned them around during that struggling time was through their meetings. And this went down through the organization, and it was all about structure because they were all over the map. They were very chaotic. So he required, with all the directors, and he set out these rules: no cell phones, right? And one fun thing you can do, set up a mock airport security section in your meeting, so everybody has to leave all their beepers behind, right? So no cell phones, no side conversations. That's another pet peeve in the chat box, right? No side conversations. You have to attend the meeting. You cannot send a substitute. This is a priority. These were weekly meetings. So mandatory participation. If you're on the road, you could come in virtually from, at the time, Skype. And they set out to create discipline, right? So every person, including him as the CEO, would start saying his name, his job title, and then reviewing her top priorities, the top, I think, 3 priorities, what the status was, and every single of the 16 executives had to do this. And they had cards, they had green, yellow, and red scorecards to indicate how they were proceeding on their top 3 priorities. So green, everything's okay, green, everything's okay, green, everything's okay. And here's where the story just gets fascinating, because the first few meetings, everybody puts up green cards and he doesn't say anything as the CEO. He just thanks them. Okay, thank you. Great. So everybody's on track. We're all doing well. Meeting number 2, meeting number 3, I think it went on. And then after about the third or fourth time, he says as the CEO, so let me get this straight. And I forget the exact figures, don't quote me on this, but he says something to the effect of, so we're losing $16 billion a year. That clearly, according to all of you, is our plan, because we're all showing green cards here. We're all good. We're all a go. Thank you. And that's all he said. Next week, somebody finally bravely puts up a red, indicating we're not on track and we don't have any plan to get on track.
Wow.
But it was through the structure of those agendas, the structure of those meetings that helped turn Ford around.
It's what they used to talk about, you know, when you're giving someone feedback, the BS sandwich, whatever, you give the nice compliment and then you give the constructive piece in the middle and then you give a compliment at the end. And sometimes offering a structure that forces people to talk about things that are uncomfortable by just giving that opens up the floodgates. And that's what we need. We say, look at, yeah, great, tell me things are what's working, but tell me what's not working. Because, you know, we need to have a balance of both. If we only focus on one and not the other, either only the good or only the bad, both are unhealthy. What we need is a good mix of both. Focus on the good because it generates momentum and steam and it pushes us forward. But also let's focus on the bad as well, because that gives us opportunities for areas in which to improve.
Yeah.
I saw one here was a pet peeve about people, you know, leaving in a meeting and announcing it, or leaving and not announcing it. And all that stuff to me is all around communication issues, right? Sometimes people leave a meeting and not announce it because they don't want to be rude and disrupt the meeting. But the funny thing is they're trying to be not rude and say something, and other people perceive that as them being rude because they didn't announce it. So it's not a matter of people being rude or not rude. It's a matter of this lack of communication. So again, if we can have some sort of structure, and I don't like saying having a rule because I'm generally not a fan of having rules. I would say guidelines, understanding, because when we get into rules, I think we could probably do another session on rules one day, but in general, we are overruled. We have way too many rules in our organization. And generally speaking, rules don't actually help us. Rules generally are someone screwed up and we're trying to avoid that happening again. And it's so true that we even call it the Michael rule, right? Oh, Michael messed up, so it's now the Michael rule. For people that follow baseball, semi-recent, the Buster Posey rule, because he broke his leg at home plate and he wanted to avoid it again. So they call it the Buster Posey rule. So I think that, again, the communication, it's not that people are purposely or maliciously trying to do things to upset the balance of the universe. They're doing it from their perspective, and it's just sometimes it's perceived in a different way. So if we can be upfront and go, here's the expectation, this is how we expect people to behave, I think people will, you'll be surprised as to how much they will buy into it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And Carol pointed out, if people are leaving a virtual meeting, certainly they can just put a little note in the chat box, right? Just to be respectful.
Sure.
Gotta go, see you next time. Thanks.
Or a little post-it note in front of the camera.
Right, yeah. On the camera, no camera thing, I know an organization that gives their people the occasional bad hair day. They like them to be on camera most of the time, but sometimes you can say you can have a bad hair day and just don't have to be on at all. The same company says, feel free to turn your camera off every few minutes and, you know, get up and adjust yourself or do whatever you need to do and then put it back on for the most part. But you don't have to be on every second.
No. And somebody pointed out too as a meeting tip to have chairless meetings. And
I love that idea.
Yeah,
that is so great.
A lot about huddles. It changes the whole dynamic to have a chairless meeting, right?
It says this is not going to be, we are not in for the long haul on this.
It just changes the whole energy in the room. One thing I suggest too, because they talk about what sitting being the new smoking. So I've recommended this to many clients and they love it, is stand-up, sit-down meetings where every other agenda item, everyone stands up for. So they do that one standing up, then they sit down for the next one, then they stand up for the next one and sit down.
Logistically, you might get the wrong body parts on the camera. That's all I'm thinking.
With the virtual, yes, that becomes a little bit of a challenge. Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Sanjay.
Yeah, whoa, down boy. Yoga ball. Getting people on a yoga ball is another thing. It can be kind of annoying too, but you know, especially if they're a fidgeter type, you know, people. There's all kind of fun things you can have. By the way, I mean, just doing silly things that are consistent with your personality are very, very powerful. Like, so the language we always use in on, every other Wednesday is someone's the cat herder and someone's the chat herder. And I was the cat herder today, just to be fun and silly. I brought a cat. Now, this is currently the favorite stuffy of my 8-year-old child. This is Steve the tiger. So, again, little silly fun things that don't necessarily have to make people guffaw, but just have an emotional reaction where they go, yeah, cute, I get it. And allow people to be more human, I think is always a fun thing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And naming your meeting rooms something fun is just a dirt simple thing you can do, right? Like, I think we've talked about this before, but Yahoo has offices where they have meeting names like consistent, so that you get to say, oh, Susan, she's inconsistent. Right? It's a little corny, but and fun
Is
things
there
like
continent as well?
Yes, I think they do. Virtual or in person, these little handheld boards so people can vote, hey, on a scale of -10 to +10, how would you rate Susan's idea? Everybody just with a flash of cards, or, use these for all sorts of fun, creative ways, or noisemakers in meetings, right? I used to, when I chaired meetings, we used to have these noisemakers. So if you had to introduce somebody, oops, somebody said something you needed clarification on. What? Somebody had a great idea. All sorts. Something weird happened in your meeting.
Emojis.
Yeah.
You can actually get little stuffy emojis, and you can throw them. I was actually an organization I did some work with years ago. They used to actually provide, and they were big football fans, and they used to provide yellow flags. So if there's something that was going on in the meeting, they would just throw the yellow flag. And, it's a silly, fun thing, but it's consistent with the personality and the brand of the organization.
Well, and Sanjay, on that note, too, I've recommended having a fun meeting ref who can play the role of sort of the court jester or a meeting ref, but in a fun, playful way, right? I want to have guidelines, I think, to help our conversations move forward, to help encourage open conversation, but keep them fun, keep them light. I know Argus Industries, they have these fun meeting rules of their own. And one of them, and they actually hold people to this, if they think somebody in a meeting that their ego is getting in the way, the person has to physically get up, leave the meeting room, to take and physically leave their ego outside and then come back in, right?
And what happens if their head doesn't fit through the door on the way back? Yeah. They didn't bring it. Perfect. Okay. So we're kind of starting to push up against the time here. Let's any last thoughts, gents?
We didn't, again, this is like all our topics. We could spend probably 4 hours on this. We barely scratched the surface,
Well, and there's so much good content in the chat. And when you get the email tomorrow that has the recording, all the chat will be on there. So you can go ahead and take a look. Really would encourage you to take a look at what's in there, because there's some great ideas that we did not have time to talk about.
Yeah.
But I think we probably want to talk about what's going to happen in 2 weeks, don't we?
I'm going to do that, yes, but just to close on today with a final thought here. One of the things I think we need to do a far better job of in our meetings is getting richer conversations from everybody, getting that inclusivity from everybody, making sure the introverts, the shy people, and we know from studies when you even have just 6 people in a meeting, introverts are less likely to speak up. So even doing simple little things like breaking up your meetings into little sub pods of 2 to 3 people to debrief, brainstorm on something, and then come back to the group can be very effective. Making it safe for people to have challenging conversations with a rumor mill agenda item where people have to share, and I used to do this, where people had to share a rumor, but in a fun way. So you'd have to lean into the table, look up and down, and then say, word on the street is, and share your rumor. So there's all sorts of fun ways we can encourage people to have richer conversations, to be more open, to bring up uncomfortable things, and to hear from the people that don't always speak up. So let's make sure we're really working intentionally to give everyone a voice. That is so important.
Perfect. So let me just kind of wrap this up then, and before I pass it to you to wrap it up, but I just want to say thank you for everyone. This was one of the episodes where we got a ton of information within the chat box. So thank you everyone for sharing. Obviously, the knowledge from all of you guys is extremely powerful. So again, like Richard said, when you get this tomorrow, please go through it. And in future, please continue sharing. We want to learn from you guys. and we want to kind of be, cat herders here, and just share the conduit of information and move everyone's organization forward. Michael, what is happening next week?
Well, thank you, Sanjay. And yes, thank you everyone for joining us. We learn as much from you as hopefully you do from us. So thank you for sharing your ideas. We will see you in 2 weeks, which is Wednesday, March 24th, where we will have a guest star, none other than Natasha Purnell, the Chief Culture Officer for Park Insurance, who coincidentally happens to have been kind enough to offer me a testimonial quote. She made it right onto the cover of the Jerk-Free Workplace. So I look so forward to having Natasha on board. She works for a very small, I don't know if Natasha's here today. She is here. There you are. Welcome, Natasha. Thank you. Natasha, very, very cool job.
She has the coolest job. The coolest job.
She's a Chief Culture Officer. So we want to, for a small company, not for a big company. So we want to hear about her experience. What is it like to be a Chief Culture Officer? What does she do? What is the role involved? How has it evolved since she started in the position? How is it involved in the virtual world? And she's going to share, because her company, I think, does a really rocking great job at connecting people socially during the pandemic, virtually, really, really good at celebrating, bringing the fun, bringing those social connections in the virtual world. So Natasha's going to share lots of, I know, great ideas with us. No pressure, Natasha. You're just going to be brilliant. You're just going to be awesome.
But it will be a significant upgrade, because I will not be here, so Natasha will be me. But a significant upgrade. So we're looking forward.
Huge upgrade.
Yes, but you also know that Jeff Tobe will be back on our next one, so we'll be looking forward to seeing Jeff.
We will.
So everyone, thank you again for joining us. We will see you in 2 weeks on every other Wednesday.
See you every other Wednesday. Bye.
Stay safe.